In recent weeks, it has become clear that the Philippines has among the worst, if not the worst, outbreak of COVID-19 epidemic in the Southeast Asian region, and that's in absence of sustained mass testing over the past few months. So the real numbers actually could be way higher. For instance, the study by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, PIDS, suggested that the numbers could be even in hundreds of thousands, if not in millions. So the question there is, sino bang sisisiin? Who has responsibility for that? Ang sinasabi ng supporters ng administration is dahil maraming pasaway. The president himself warned of a martial law-like response, bringing in the Philippine military in order to enforce these social distancing regimes if things really go in a desperate direction. On the other hand, the critics of the administration suggest that the fault is with the administration, that the government did not impose timely and expedient travel restrictions in January when other countries, Singapore, Taiwan, among others, were pushing for that. So maybe we are flattening the curve, maybe the lockdown is working, but still the numbers in the Philippines in terms of recovery rates, in terms of overall outbreak, in terms of whether the numbers are reliable in absence of sustained mass testing over the past few weeks and months. So how do you assess the response of the administration and the government, and how should we move forward? One way of looking at it is titignan mo yung crisis in terms of stages of deterioration. The first stage is when you impose very strict travel restrictions and monitoring mechanisms para sisiguraduhin na people from hotspots do not get into your country to begin with. So for instance, Taiwan and Singapore imposed very strict travel restrictions and at some point even banned entry. First from people from Wuhan in China and then people from entire China, and this was in January of this year. Now, the second stage is once an infected person actually gets into the country, gets in touch with people and potentially infects citizens of the new host country. In this case, what we're going to look at are contact tracing and also targeted quarantines. In the case of Vietnam, which is a country actually poorer than the Philippines in terms of per capita income, what they did was they did not lock down Hanoi or major cities in the country earlier this year. What they did was in areas or in a village in the north, which saw some infection rates, they had a targeted quarantine of that area. The third stage is when nakaroon ng intra-community transmission. Ibig sabihin, ang hirap na i-contact trace kung who you got in touch with, meaning the infected person, because ang daming degrees of transmission or infection na nangyari. Now, this was the case in South Korea because South Korea failed actually the initial preventative phase, which was aggressive contact tracing and strict travel restrictions to make sure that people from infected areas don't get in. But effective sila pagdating sa containing once there was a huge outbreak. The fourth phase is when you have a full-fledged crisis. At nakita natin unfortunately yan in Italy and increasingly in other European countries, nakikita natin yan. There are comparative studies to show what are really the best practices around the world based on different measurements. According to Deep Knowledge Ventures, a Hong Kong-based venture capital fund group, the Philippines actually does not rank very well if you compare it to other countries. Based on their survey of 150 countries around the world and around 20 countries in the Asia-Pacific, not only the Southeast Asian region, the Philippines actually is among the riskiest and least safe countries. Meanwhile, countries like Israel and South Korea and Germany were seen as the most effective and safe countries in terms of responding to the COVID-19 crisis. South Korea has shown that even though you may have failed the preventative phase, in short, there's always an opportunity na bumawi and at the same time, never be complacent. And the other lesson is don't relax your lockdown too early on because pwede bumalik ulit in a second wave yung crisis na yan. That's why many countries in Europe and around the world are doing gradual relaxation of the lockdown, from Spain and Italy and increasingly to Germany and other countries in Europe. The United States is also looking at that. But if you relax the lockdown too early at hindi nagkaroon ng sapat na social distancing, pwede bumalik ulit yung COVID-19 epidemic. That's why we have to be very careful. If open yung borders mo, pwede pa rin pumasok ito from abroad. And this has been the problem of the more successful countries earlier this year, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, among others. Ako po si Richard Haydarian. Stand with us, stand for truth.